I hope you really enjoyed that documentary. It certainly raises lots and lots of questions. I think Grenville has arrived. Is that right, Chris? I'm not in charge of the waiting room. He's here. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, sorry that we've had a bit of a miscommunication about time there.
My mistake entirely, guys.
No,
I apologise.
it's okay. It's
we'll
all right.
And try to bounce as quick as well as we can.
It's great. I did introduce you before the film with a bit about your background and about the film. So I guess the question I was going to ask before the film, I'm sure you've been asked it lots of times. What was the impetus for doing these documentaries?
Look, it was the new atheist movement of, you know, the noughties, I guess, that got me really thinking about it. And we just wanted to come up with a polite but well-researched response.
Yeah, great. I was just sort of wondering, you know, as you were sort of trying to understand how the universe is so finely tuned, were you ever like challenged by these sort of new atheists who, you know, who are very, you know, intelligent people, and were you challenged by some of their thoughts and their beliefs?
Yes, very much so. I think perhaps one of the most challenging arguments that they raise is the question of suffering, where they say, okay, it's lovely that God supposedly designed this world, universe, but then why do people suffer in it? That's probably the biggest counterpunch that you get. And there's also the probability argument. Yeah, okay, well, it is very unlikely that all of these things would go right for the planet, but, you know, extremely rare things happen in a great big universe, or if you have a multiverse, then your odds are even higher. So yeah, I don't want to pretend that it's an easy knockdown, that ha ha, my faith is obvious and your atheism is silly, ho ho. Not at all.
Do you ever see a bit of a glimmer of hope in those people?
Yeah. Look, I was talking to Peter Atkins at Oxford after an interview we'd done with John Lennox and him. They did a debate. And when the cameras were off, I said, look, I said, what if you're wrong? And he said, oh, what do you mean if there's a lovely father who loves me in a kind haven of bliss forever? He said, well, of course I'd like that to be true. But he said, I'd be intellectually embarrassed. And I just said, well, which would you rather, be intellectually embarrassed and alive, or right and dead? And he kind of laughed, you know, had the good grace to kind of laugh and say, well, of course it would be nice, but that doesn't prove it's true. So I think people have hearts, don't they, that, you know, that want these, that would love there to be an eternity of bliss and a lovely parent and a beautiful, you know, interaction with other people and so forth. Sure, who wouldn't?
Absolutely. Chris, do we have any questions? Yes.
It doesn't look like we've got any questions yet. So what we're going to do with questions is, if you've got a question, it would be good to indicate in the chat that you've got a question, and then we can invite you to ask your question, to unmute yourself and ask the question. But if anybody just wants to wave their hand now to ask a question, they could do that too, as long as we can see the hands. I've got two screens going, so I'm not sure that I can see everyone. And can I invite anybody who's here and who's game to turn on your videos so that we feel like we're in a sort of congenial environment and
real world,
almost together. But do leave yourself muted unless you're going to ask a question.
So how many documentaries were in your series?
There were 13, Sarah, and the first 9 look at issues of theism broadly, although from a Christian point of view. The last 4 look at Jesus in particular and take a critical look at any evidence for and against Jesus. So yeah, that's kind of the structure of it. And we've tried to do quite a bit of science and a little bit of philosophy in there. Yeah, so people could, I could certainly put up the references for the URLs for people to find them.
I've already got somebody up here who says, how can I access these documentaries?
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, we'll do that.
Great. You can put that up on the ISCAST website.
Yeah, sure.
So I've just got a question from Susie. Do you want to unmute yourself? I can't see everybody on my screen.
Hi.
Hi.
We can hear you,
Susie.
Susie.
So,
I think your internet might not be great. Your voice is coming and going. We might just have to ask that question without
Okay.
you asking it.
So Susie asks, what do you think about the idea of planning our lives before we arrive on Earth? The lessons we choose to try to learn.
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question right, the idea of us planning our lives, do you mean? Or do you mean the idea of providence or God planning our lives?
I'm not entirely sure. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure about that question. And given that Susie's internet isn't great, why don't we ask Susie to ask her question again, clarify it a bit in the chat, and meanwhile, see if somebody else has a question.
Chris, oh, here we go. Of the constants mentioned, which do you find most convincing of a creator God? From Tony.
Grenville, why don't we ask Tony to ask his question verbally? It just sort of
Brilliant, yeah, much more friendly.
brings us into the space a little bit better. Tony, where are you?
Yeah.
Well, I'm right here, Grenville. I think I mean exactly what I wrote, I think. So, yeah.
It's a good question. Look, I guess I'm a big. So some of the stuff Alistair McGrath says in one of the other films we did, where you get right to the constants right down that have to be set at the beginning of the universe. They don't just pop in later into reality. Things like I'm just trying to find his comments here quickly, but I guess that's the one that really those ones that really freak me out. The ones that are right at. I mean, look, I guess. The other one, of course, is Hugh Ross, who we interviewed in there. He's got a whole list of those things on his website. And in some ways, the answer is all of them together. You know, to me, that's the most impressive, is the combination of the whole pack of them. First of all, for there to be life on Earth, then for there to be a habitable planet, and then down below that, for stuff to hold together in the universe. You know, the strong and weak nuclear force, things like that. That's right down fundamental to there even being any matter, and perhaps they're the most impressive to my brain anyway. But it's the combination. It's the fact that the odds of one are ridiculous. The odds of them all hanging together is almost off the dial.
Thanks, Grenville.
Right, you've already answered the next question. I've just heard in the chat. That just answered my question. Thanks, Catherine. Anyway.
I have a question.
Great. Go ahead.
Gerard. My name is Gerard.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I can't see you on my screen. I think Grenville and Chris can.
Now, I've been following the intelligent design argument for the last 15 years. You know, and somebody like Stephen Myers, for instance, would suggest that science has not always taken an atheistic approach. And, you know, he speaks about the early people of modernity like Newton, Galileo, and others who are quite deeply spiritual and religious. And he says that the shift more or less came about with Laplace, you know, the French physicist who brought in the idea of atheism. And there seems to be a suggestion that the antagonism that atheism has with regards to religion is less rational than it is reactionary to the excessive authoritarianism found in the church, the control, the scandals, perhaps, and wanting to be free of control of the church, you know, and perhaps at a certain time in history, certain ideas of religion were protected in a very narrow and superficial way. And so that science was moved along an atheistic path, less out of reason than out of reaction. So I'm just wondering if, you know, when you look at the arguments of people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris and others, you find that, you know, although they purport to be intellectuals, but the arguments actually not very convincing at all. And so it makes you wonder, what's the real agenda behind this whole movement? You know, is it really based on reason and science per se, or is it some other agenda? Or
That's a
what is
great
the thing in this?
Yeah. Sorry, did I cut you off
Yes,
there?
Gerard, my name is Gerard.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. I think you're absolutely right. When you look at the greats of history, they were definitely monotheists, mainly Christian monotheists. Some Jews, some Muslims. Let's be fair. But yeah, and I think a lot of it does come from rage. When you look at the new atheist movement and the three that you mentioned, it really gets going after 9/11, and in a sense, they blame Islam for that, especially Sam Harris. Sam Harris is very angry with Islam. Nice guy. I've interviewed him for another film. He's a genial, likable, logical person who is very angry about some of the abuses of religion, as you've said, and so he hates the whole thing. I mean, you know, you go to the atheist convention and you see the T-shirts. Religion flies you into buildings. Science flies into the moon. Things like that. Well, you know, there's so many rebuttals of that. First of all, how many religions fly you into buildings? How often has that happened? What sample size of religious people are we talking about? And then again, and I think that John Lennox makes this point really well. Why is the universe rationally intelligible? Surely that would match with the idea of a mind behind it also shaping our minds, rather than it just being this completely chaotic higgledy-pig. Where do laws come from, etc. So yeah, I think you make a great point. Without wanting to minimize their argument with an ad hominem by saying, oh, you're just saying that because you're angry about how you were treated in a Christian boarding school, Richard Dawkins, and not arguing with their arguments, I think you may be onto the reason why they're so attracted to some of those things. Yeah.
Great. Ken, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, g'day Grenville, Ken Stanton here.
How you doing, Ken?
Yeah, going really well, thanks. My question was, in your response to Lawrence Krauss, you drew a contrast between his suggestion that the laws of physics or a multiverse was the first uncaused cause, and your position that the first uncaused cause was a being. Why would you say it's more likely that a mind or a personality or a being would be the first cause rather than some impersonal force?
Yeah, what a great question. I guess I could try a historical answer. I mean, previously we thought that something had always existed. I think you'd say mainstream Western science had a steady state view of the universe, and that stuff was eternal, matter was eternal, and that mind had grown out of that. Then along came Big Bang Theory and said, hang on a second, there was the beginning to the universe. There was a singular space-time event at the beginning of the universe. Well, that sounds much more like the Judeo-Christian or the monotheistic view that somebody made it. So I think almost that probably took us a step closer. You didn't have people like Bertrand Russell in the past saying, oh, well, I would say that the universe is just there and that's it. You know, so there's just this brute fact of all this stuff there. I think it demands a better explanation than that. Well, then where do you go? Well, I guess, yeah, you do go to Lawrence Krauss, and he says in his book, The Universe from Nothing, he doesn't actually mean nothing. Nothing means, as I tried to argue there, a whole lot of forces and laws of physics and various quantum kind of stuff going on. So where did that come from? Where did the laws come from? I guess in a simple answer to your question, perhaps the biggest clue is not just that there's stuff there, that could have happened, but that there's laws, and that seems to me to suggest a mind rather than just a brute physical existence, which you'd also then have to explain. And I know, Ken, your next question may be, well, what about infinite regress? You know, I mean, how do you posit a God? It's the old mummy, what made God question, in a sense. I guess something has to be there. Something has to be the first cause, something or someone. And because of the rationality of the result, I would say a mind is a pretty good guess.
Thanks,
but please come back at me if that's not convincing.
No. I don't need convincing. It's just an issue that I think arises, and I don't necessarily mean first in chronology. I mean first in causal effect.
Right.
in asking the question, but you do either end up, I think, in an infinite regress or having to choose either between some personality or some other inexplicable existence.
Yeah, panspermia or some funny thing. Yeah, from some other universe.
Yeah,
or
thanks.
Multiverse theory, which to me only confounds the.
Well, it just pushes it one step back, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, indeed it does. Indeed it does.
Thanks for your response.
No, thanks for the question. There's a J.P. Morland kind of argument too, which is worth here. I'll try and give you a quick summary, but look it up. It's really worth hearing. He basically says, look, try to imagine a roll of dominoes, and just think of causality in the universe like a big long row of dominoes, and each one causes the next thing and so forth, and it's multi-branching and all that. Okay, great. Stop the tape, rewind, go back to the first thing that ever happens in that row of dominoes. What is it? Is it a domino? Well, the question then is, why does that domino fall? Why does that domino fall at all? A domino doesn't just decide to fall on its own. It requires a finger, or actually a mind, to actuate the finger to push it. If it can fall over on its own, then it's not just a domino. And that's an argument that the first cause of the universe is actually probably personal rather than physical. And I think it's a pretty simple one. It sticks in my head, but I actually think he's thought that through pretty well.
Grenville, can I just interrupt at this stage and introduce what I hope is a clarifying comment, but we're actually talking about two different arguments here, aren't we? One is a first cause argument, and one is a fine-tuning argument. Is that right? Just for people who are trying to work out what's going on here. Some people might be right on top of those things. For other people, these would be new ideas. So
thanks, Chris. Yeah, so the fine-tuning says, why did all this stuff go right? Wow, look how fine-tuned it all is. And even in the film, we only looked at 1/100th of what's out there in terms of fine-tuning. And again, I put up reasons.org, where Hugh Ross has a list of, I forget, I said it might be 122 factors, whatever it is, for life, and he's probably added to it since. So yeah, but the other argument, as you're saying, is, well, what was the first cause of the universe? Separate ideas, separate concept.
Great. Peter West has a few questions actually for you. Do you want to unmute, Peter?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Excuse me. Well, the first one that occurred to me when I was watching Krauss, and Krauss, says, "Oh, yes, it's quantum gravity, and you take a quantum vacuum and bang, according to those laws, it'll come out." And avoided the question of where did the law come from, and then later on, he's talking about, he goes on to the multiverse theory. And in the multiverse theory, he starts talking about how you could have any number of universes sort of popping into being along with their laws. So in his second comment, he says, the laws are created simultaneously with the universe, which is a complete contradiction of his first argument. And he doesn't seem to have noticed that. I wonder if you put that in because you had noticed that particular contradiction.
No, exactly. I didn't need to rebut that one. It just seemed like, you picked it up. And not everybody does, to be honest. Yeah.
Shoot yourself in the foot, Mr. Krauss. Thank you very much. Makes it easier.
It's interesting, just while you're thinking, that word pop, a whole universe just pops into, what does pop mean? Snap and crackle? It's very hand waving, isn't it? Very, something happens and pop, yeah.
A very big pop, a big bang in fact, to create one of these things. Talking about, so the other thing was that Chris has clarified that the two arguments. One's the uncaused cause, and one's the fine tuning. It seems to me that with Krauss's argument, he's sort of saying, okay, the uncaused cause is quantum gravity, and that begs the whole question of the phenomenal interplay of all the other constants that are involved in the universe. In the whole array, the whole panoply of physical laws is necessary for this thing. So he's just sidestepped the argument about the ridiculous improbability of all this. Aristotle, I believe, had no notion of a personal. His idea of the first uncaused cause was something so magnificent and powerful that it would have nothing to do with scrappy human beings who were just beneath contempt. And I think the argument about whether the first cause of things is a being, in fact, a person, really, you come back to Jesus. You come back to the person of Jesus. And Jesus' defiance of everything in the physical universe, everything we know about it, Jesus defied.
Yeah.
And for Christians, that is a critical point that we have to keep in mind in considering that question. Anyway, thanks.
No, thank you. That's good. I mean, it does make you boggle, doesn't it? At the incarnation, the cross, if that first cause, that massive being, actually does care about the human race, then even more wow than before.
Exactly. Yeah.
And one of my favorite things in John, where it says the word became flesh, that's a massive headache to a Greek philosopher, where logos, that made it all with logic and mind, became part of matter. Are you joking?
It's a pretty big headache with the Jews.
It's I mean, you'll be contemplating that for a while before you 1% of the way get it, I think.
Thank you.
No, that's
right.
That's a good call.
Okay, you've got a number of questions to answer now. It's all rolling in. Susan, or it's James, had a question earlier.
I think it's a little bit off track now, but you mentioned about their comeback at Christians regarding the problem of suffering. That's a problem for us. It's not one for them. Or don't they see it? Do they have any problems with suffering? Because if there's no moral cause and there's no moral universe, it just statistically is, then suffering is just suffering. And they have no particular, as far as I can tell, no particular moral obligation to alleviate it, and no moral comeback for causing it. It just is. Am I completely off the track?
I think you're absolutely right. That's what atheism says. But ironically, I know a bunch of atheists who live much, much better than that philosophy would suggest. And to be fair, we can probably think of Christians who live a lot worse than Christianity would suggest, saying we should care about suffering. God does care about suffering, etc. And we don't always, do enough. So let's admit that and get that out of the way up front. But yeah, your point is great. What can an atheist say from atheism at a funeral, at a bedside of someone, a child dying of some terrible genetic disease? Well, they can just say, I'm really, and there'll be people with kind hearts, because in my view, God's shining in there, the light who lights every man is shining in there. But atheism won't give them any resources to comfort themselves or others. And I think they know it. I think the honest ones know it. They're grim about it. And they try these approaches like, oh, well, life's even more precious because it's rare. That's how everything works. If it's rare, it's precious. But I just say, if it's that good, why wouldn't you want more of it? So yeah, suffering, to me, suffering, and it's, we can't answer it in 30 seconds, but it's certainly not, it doesn't have ontological status. It's not going to be around forever. It's something God, I believe, is working to get rid of. And yeah.
Grenville, I wonder if I could interrupt. We do have somebody amongst us who's a philosopher and has written a book about God and evil and such things. I don't know if Bruce would like to make any comment at this stage. You are muted, Bruce.
Please feel free if you'd like.
What to say about God and evil? The question is, why might God create a world in which it was possible for evil to arise and not systematically prevent it, right? One of the reasons why he might do that is that certain very great goods in the life of created beings would be missing if God adopted such a policy of not allowing any evil to occur. For example, one of the features of human life is that we trust each other with important things. We get into relationships in which trust in a person's moral character and their diligence and so forth are important features of human relationships. For example, in marriage, right? One of the things which is important to us about marriages is precisely that the partners are vulnerable to being hurt by each other, right? Things can go wrong in a marriage. If nothing could possibly go wrong in a marriage, then the shape of a marriage would be just radically different in every way. Your stupidity, your carelessness. Similarly with relationships with your children. We feel that we need to care for children, we need to protect them. But if nothing much can go wrong with the children, no matter what we do, we don't have to teach them. If you can go down to the garage and you can drink from any bottle in the garage, you won't come to harm. Right? No, we say, no, we've got it. These are all things which we value about the kind of beings we are. And they're not dependent upon the actual occurrence of evil, but what they are dependent upon is God's not adopting a policy of systematically preventing them. Okay? So the fact that we've got this value raises the question, might not God share that value, and so therefore not adopt the policy of systematically preventing them? Now, that's just a sort of simple move in quite a long and complicated series of arguments, but I thought it was just worthwhile throwing out there as something to think about.
Thanks, Bruce. That's fascinating stuff. Yeah, thank you. You know, there really is a whole lecture series on that, isn't there? That whole issue, all different approaches to it and so on. A mate of mine just wrote a THD on it, which is some of the best stuff I've read. I hope it's published soon. I'll actually plug it if it is. But yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you very much.
Can I just make one other comment about the fine-tuning argument? I think one of the things that you need to get clear about is what really does the work in the fine-tuning argument for the existence of God. It can't just simply be that we are all the beneficiaries of some very, very low probability events, right? Each of us is, right? Think about the enormous improbability which obtained a year before your birth, 12 months before your birth, that you would come into existence. Think about all those sperm which had to be, come into existence, the right ones, and then the one that had, enormously improbable.
Yeah.
A design argument saying someone must have designed my coming into existence because it's a very, very low probability event that I did, right? That doesn't get much purchase. So it's not just simply that our existence is enormously improbable relative to, basic truths of physical cosmology. Something else is doing the work, and you've got to think about what is doing the work in that. So I just throw that out for you to think about, because I don't want to give a lecture on the fine-tuning argument right now.
I'd love to rent you, Bruce. I'd love to just be able to, pick up the phone when I have life decisions and things to make, and rent a philosopher. It's more important than dial a dominoes, isn't it? Really, that's that'd be gold.
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments.
Anyway, look, thanks for a very very enjoyable time.
Sure.
To
I got you.
listening to you talk, and yeah, other people will have their questions.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. So, what's your book called? Excuse my ignorance.
Oh, my book on the
Oh, there it is. God, the Best and Evil.
Called
Yeah.
God, the Best and Evil, but its intended readership is other professional philosophers and PhD students and the like. Okay, so just yeah.
It's published by a little-known press called Oxford University Press. No, that's impressive. That's brilliant. I must get that one actually.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
Good. I'll have at least one reader.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Because I don't think the Bible claims that. You may be very familiar with this concept, but I mean, I can think of quotes in Paul and in the Psalms. It doesn't really claim that nature is without suffering or that it reflects God's character. I mean, Psalm 19, a favorite of mine, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork, but it doesn't say that nature and with all the suffering in it necessarily shows us God's ideal intention or his character. And Paul in Romans 1, his eternal godliness can be seen from nature. But it doesn't mean everything in there, like the suffering, reflects his ideal will. I don't think. You're so welcome to disagree with me quietly or noisily. But in a sense, to continue the Psalm 19 thing, if in part 1 we're talking about a generic God, then in the second part we start to use his name, and we find out about his attributes from the Torah, from the written word. And then in the third section, we hear his name and we find out that he's a redeemer. In other words, a rich relative who buys you back when you get into trouble. And we start to get the idea of grace and the gospel being hinted at there. And that takes a minute. If you read that psalm, it's actually a fascinating piece of art, how it's done that. And I think he's really thought it through carefully. Yes, you can look at the universe and say there's got to be someone up there, but it could be Allah. It could be it could be Jesus. There's no brand name on it. But then if you want, then you need to take a next step and look into revelation. Does that God speak? And if so, then how and which one is it? At least that's how it slices and dices up, at least for some people.
Right. Can I ask Jean to give his question?
Jean.
I knew I was going to do that. I knew it.
It's the French.
Oh, I saw the name and I went, I'm going to say this.
And you'll very quickly realize that in actual fact, South African. So a long time ago, a group of French Huguenots went to South Africa and we came to Australia in 1999. Grenville, I would really like to see all your documentaries. So if you could get us references to that, that will be fantastic. I've just got two basic questions for you. You've been talking to probably a lot of very highly intelligent people. Were there any times in your research that you started to doubt about the existence of God? That's the first question. And the second question that I would like to ask you, if you refer to God, do you only refer to the God as the God in the Bible, or is there a God that's above only that you can only get to God through Jesus Christ, the only gate to God, and there's only one God? Do you make a distinction between what God is, God for other people and other religions, and your God through the Bible?
Whew, they're great questions. I think by your bookshelf, you're a lawyer, Jean, is that right?
Yes.
There we go. I thought I saw Butterworths or something there on the shelf. But they're great questions. So as to the first one, a lot of very smart people. Sorry, was it Did I Ever Doubt? Was that the first one? Yeah. I think the reason I got into apologetics in the first place was because I mean, I became a Christian through apologetics at university, and then I guess I kind of drifted a bit off into devotional only land, a bit kind of devotional emotional land, and lost that at a particular time. A whole lot of stuff happened, and then I went looking, hang on a minute, and digging for the deeper stuff. I think many Christians don't do that, or at least a lot of people I know don't really dig into the rational side, the intellectual side of Christianity. People in law, in science do tend to. And so, yeah, I'm quite comfortable for there to be a debate going on in my head at all times about issues to do with God and everything else, actually. But I've also got the devotional thing going on at the same time. I've got almost like, and I'm not claiming special revelation, but there are times when I think I've experienced miracles. I believe I've at a couple of times been supernaturally communicated with, and I make, if you knew me, you would know how carefully and cautiously I make that claim. I'm not the God told me what brand of toothpaste to buy guy. But I guess, yeah, there is a personal side to my faith, not just the rational. So if the rational rattles and shakes around a bit and gets a few challenges and creaks and goes back, that's okay. It doesn't scare me. Maybe it did in my 20s. Does that kind of dig at what you're asking?
And the second question was if you refer to God, and I would very much love to read Bruce's book as well. I've made a note of the name of the book. If you refer to God, do you only refer to the God of the Bible?
That's a great question. If I drew a continuum, up one end is what I'd call a universalist who would say that everybody is saved eventually. Up the other end is a very narrow, almost elitist kind of Christian who says not only Christians, but only Christians who believe what I believe are saved. There's a line there somewhere, isn't there? And I'd position myself at neither of those two ends. The first thing I'd say is I don't judge who knows the real God. There are probably people who haven't had the benefit of Christian witness, who have somehow looked up at the night sky, looked at the face of their children, experienced love, and somehow just intuited that there is a big kind face behind the universe. I wouldn't want to dare to judge their experience or say mine was superior. But I think Jesus is pretty clear. Whoever's seen me has seen the Father. No man comes to the Father except by me. And yet Jesus may be doing things with people that don't know his name, just off-brand name kind of. He may be calling them to himself. And I love that text in Romans where it says that the Gentiles who do not have the law, they don't have the benefit of revelation like the Jews do in Paul's world. They do by nature the things contained in the law, showing that the law is written in their hearts. I mean, that's very new covenant kind of speech. The law of God is written in their hearts, and they don't have the written law. Nothing against written law, by the way, looking at your bookshelf, but their consciences either excuse them or accuse them. And Paul talks about how they'll do on the day when God judges the secrets of human hearts, and they'll do okay according to how I read it. To me, that leaves a big wide gate open to people who may not share my brand name. Yes, I think Jesus is the most spectacularly brilliant revelation of God possible. But I don't want to cut other people out if they are on the way to that, or if they know him. If I think of Jews, for example, who've seen terrible behavior by Christians historically in the 20th century, and they almost couldn't come at Jesus, but they very much live by his principles and look for grace from God, even though they may not know the mechanism. And I'd want to not slam the kingdom of heaven's door in their faces. Does that kind of get at what you?
No, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
That's great. Matthew.
Yeah, so I was interested in whether you see philosophically a difference between fine-tuning arguments that are based in the fundamental laws of physics and fine-tuning arguments that are sort of happening within the evolution of the universe under those laws, things that you could point to and saying, well, here is when the unlikely event had to happen, whether you would see them as carrying different weight or implications for whether there's a God.
Yeah, well, Matthew, the honest answer is I haven't thought about the difference very much. They're certainly in a different category, but yeah, I'd have to be honest and say, great, I salute the question, but I haven't really probably thought of a decent answer. you know, you have the classic story, don't you, of Fred Hoyle, the atheist steady state guy, who when he hears about Big Bang Theory mocks it. In fact, he comes up with the mocking name, oh, Big Bang Theory. And then he studies the carbon molecule, and he's just so blown away by the fine tuning that must have produced it, that he turns, actually, I've got the quote here somewhere. He says, here it is. He says, would you not say to yourself, some super calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom. Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule. And he says, and this is the famous quote, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intelligence has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And then he goes on and spends the rest of his life looking for God, through Eastern religion in his case, but he goes on this mad search for theism. I guess in that answer you see a bit of both, don't you? You see the, I mean, what category do we put the carbon molecule, carbon atom rather, into? I guess you'd say it's showing, you know, has it evolved later, or was it were the laws behind it set at the beginning of the universe?
Yeah, I guess that case I'd say, well, yes, it is a result of the laws.
Okay.
So that's probably, yeah, in the former category.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas, what are you going to say? What, like the strong weak nuclear force, for example, they're in the more fundamental constants?
Well, that'd still be in the, yeah, I'm thinking more about, for instance, if we believe that the appearance of self-replicating complex structures, the first things that would say are on the path towards life.
Life, yeah.
If that was so unlikely that just statistically it shouldn't have ever happened in the history of the universe, or that had it happened, it should have only happened a few times and in places where complex life should never have evolved, then I would have some tendency to put that in a different category, because the laws are saying, well, this is possible but unlikely. And yeah, so once, I guess, after we've got the laws, we can assess unlikeliness, whereas the laws arising is a completely different process. It's really, we can't imagine before that. So that I think it has a bit of a different status.
Yeah. What I tripped over was in Hoyle's quote where he says some super intellect has monkeyed with the laws of physics. So he's tracing the existence of that atom back to more fundamental laws that shaped it.
Yeah. At
least as I understand him, and maybe even more fundamental than that, the force of the Big Bang, for example. If you take that model, why is it so fine tuned? Why didn't the big suck happen soon after? Or whatever, or why didn't the two Big Bang happen? Maybe that relates to some of those forces as well. I love reading Paul Davies on this, the mind of God. He you know, you're waiting for him to play a hymn and do an altar call and call you to faith at the end of the book, but then he doesn't. He goes off in a different direction. But some of the stuff in there is just is pretty. It's almost like worship to me to read that, actually. Not to him. There it is, Paul Davies, The Mind of God. Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I wish I could give you a better answer, but it's got me thinking along those, a new line there.
I'm fairly new to this space, this science faith space, and listening to a lot of the new atheists, they often, or the physicists, they often kind of just go back to explaining the existence of the universe to the laws of physics. It seems to be the throwaway line, oh, it's because of the laws of physics, which don't mean a lot to me being a biologist, but it's kind of just, I mean, this is just a comment, not a question, but it just seems to be their thing that they tend to do.
Perhaps we could ask, go back to Graham McLean's comment. He says, I'd be interested to hear from the physicists whether they think that, for example, speculations about the multiverse, Krauss-like stories about the universe coming from a quantum vacuum, nothing, and so on, whether the physicists present think that makes sense. Now, do we have some physicists present who would care to speak up? I know we have some physicists present, but yeah.
I just thought Lawrence Krauss was an incredible man of faith because it's an untestable statement. You can't even prove that he's wrong.
Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, you're right, you can't argue with it, can you? I'm going to ask Stephen, not Stephen Collins, the other Stephen, I'll get to you, Stephen Collins, in a little bit, but Stephen B.
Thanks. This sort of picks up on some of the discussion earlier, but this whole idea about a multiverse, and I wonder if people postulate this because they don't like something about the universe that we find ourselves in. To me, I mean, like I guess my background's physics, but I'm not sure I can comment on theoretical physics very much. But the idea that you have multiple universes, that it seems like that flies in the face of Occam's razor, that this seeking the simplest explanation, or it's at least as preposterous as the idea that there's a creator God out there.
Yeah, good call. Thank you. I noticed a comment from Susie. The Bible is hugely interpreted by the ego of humanity. That's its limitation. Respect. The old simple model of reading the two books, isn't it? The book of nature and the Bible together. There's got to be dialogue between, and in a sense, you're underlining the importance of this group. There's got to be dialogue between theology and science for the good of both, it would seem to me. Well, I'm on the theology side more, so I'll just admit it. I need it, yeah, love hearing you guys talk. And I wish we had more time for that comment. Stephen, thank you.
Sarah, I'm not sure if you're speaking to us, but we can hear you.
You'd think by this time, of the amount of Zoom calls I've had, that I'd get it right. It's
at least no podcast with a towel on or something like that, or you had.
No, that's how almost happened actually with my kids' schooling. But anyway, they almost had to leave the school. I don't know why I do that, but I'm just trying not to let you hear the kids' noise in the background. It's 8:40, Chris. Do you think we do promise everybody that we'll wrap up by 20 to 9?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Roger's just made a comment.
Yes, he has.
He says, as a physicist who can type but not talk, in brief, I would think something arising from nothing via vacuum fluctuations is physically possible, but the multiverse concept being untestable is in that sense unscientific. And so there, I guess we're pointing at how we understand science and where the limits of science are, because as some people have brought up, and as Roger's commenting there, a theory, even if it's mathematically possible, that doesn't have apparently any way of being testable, can you call that a scientific theory? I think that's the point that Roger's making.
Makes sense.
Well, why don't we finish then? I think that it would be great if Philippa would pray for us. I'm aware that these conversations can be quite frustrating, can't they? Because there is so much more to be said and discussed, and we only get a little bit of what's going on, but so be it. It's the best we can do at this stage. Let me invite Philippa to unmute herself wherever she is, and as we finish. Thanks, Philippa.
Great God of wonders, creator and sustainer of the universe, we are in awe as we think of the world we live in and its very existence. But we are so grateful that we didn't have to imagine who you are, but that you have revealed yourself to us, in particular through Jesus Christ. We thank you for this, and we offer ourselves to you once again to serve you, and we ask you to live through us in our everyday relationships with all we come in contact with. We ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen.